your buyer, or your end buyer, however you've set it up, but it's you if you're the buyer in this situation. What that does is it takes away anybody else caring about this. The mortgage company could care less anymore. The North Carolina Attorney Generals could care less anymore. And it entitles the buyer immediately to the profits of the sale when it's sold. So again, this is really the most important paragraph in the whole. This is what a key to what makes this whole thing tick and what protects everybody. Because now we have your seller protected as long as that mortgage is in the seller's name. We have that buyer protected because as soon as it's paid off, it goes to the buyer. And there are a few other things we explain at closing, such as this is really good for sellers because if the buyer breaches this contract, all the seller has to do is contact the trustee, prove that the buyer has gone 30 days late on a payment, and they will get the legal ownership of their property back with no foreclosure, no eviction. They can just get it back as long as the seller breaches. But on the other hand, they can't just go 2 years down the road and let the buyer make the payments and change their mind. So I can only make this trust effective when the mortgage is paid off, and I can only revoke it if there's a breach. In all my 20 years of doing these, I've done hundreds and hundreds. I can count on my two hands the number that have gone wrong. In 5 or 6 of those cases, it was all one investor. He just got in over his head, and when we called him up and said, hey, your seller's calling, the payment's 30 days late, what do you want to do? He said, give them back. Now, most sellers don't want their property back, but the point is they're legally protected. They're going to get their property back, and then they can do with it what they want. In the other cases that went wrong, we were able to resolve those. There was only one where we really couldn't come to a meeting of the minds. In that case, the buyer had spent about $50,000 in rehab and then lost their jobs. So they were, couldn't make payments. They were behind on the taxes and the trustee's fee. The seller absolutely said, no more, I'm fed up. The buyer said, you can't take it back. I'm gonna lose my $50,000. What did we do? We put the property up for sale. It sold, it made a profit. The buyer got the profit and the seller got the mortgage out of their name. So everyone was happy. So these things, they work. This is the 4th document. And this one kind of sort of recaps all the terms of the deal. This just says what we just talked about. The seller's putting the property in a trust. A deed will be recorded. The seller is going to be the beneficiary. At the same time as this transfer, the seller is signing assignment of beneficial interest to give the trust to the buyer, but that is not valid until subject to the terms of the escrow agreement. So I know there's repetition in what you're hearing here. The thing is, for me, y'all are investors. If you start doing these subject twos, you're going to hear them over and over and over again, and you're going to know them like the back of your hand, just like I do. But remember, your seller has never heard this before, and your seller is someone who doesn't know anything about real estate or investing. All they know is when they sell their property, their mortgage should be paid off. So this is all strange, foreign, and unusual. So I do try to purposely repeat it. So I go through the documents once, it's repeated again here. And then as I go through the documents, I sort of flip them upside down on the table. When we're all done, we flip them back up and sign them. So it really gives your seller 3 chances to hear it and ask questions because they aren't going to understand it like you do. Then this paragraph just goes into the terms. This is where we put the purchase price and anything you agreed to. Guys, most of the time, the buyer is just taking over the balance of the mortgage and the payments. In this case, and this one that I chose to send as an example, the seller's actually making a couple $1,000s. You can see this is the purchase price, $79,812. The mortgage balance is $77,312. Very often these numbers match. But as I was saying to you at the beginning, sometimes we'll find a situation where a seller has equity. So sometimes the seller might get paid $10,000. The thing is, use your creativity. Sometimes these will say that the seller will wait and get their, let's say they have $10,000, they'll wait and get it when it's sold. Sometimes it's the other way. Sometimes sellers are upside down. They know more than it's worth, and sellers are going to have to kick in. This paragraph here is where we put in the terms that you tell us. You're going to make those terms, and they can be as creative as you want them to be. Then there's 3 more documents in this closing. There's a lien waiver, which I'm not sharing because that's the same for any closing, nothing special to a subject to. There's a 1099, same thing, nothing special. And there's a closing statement, also the same for every closing. The difference in this closing statement is usually when you go down here, your seller just zeroes out. The seller gets 0 and the buyer pays all the closing costs. In this case, as I pointed out, the seller was making a little profit, so the seller has 2,500 bucks coming to him. But that's all the documents that it takes to do a subject to loan. Well, the most common question is, what about the due on sale clause? Well, first of all, for those of you who don't know, what the heck is a due on sale clause? A due on sale clause is a clause in every mortgage. And this is what it says. It says that if you sell this property, the bank has a right to call your note due in full and have payment made in full. But the devil's in the details, like with everything. So the relevant language is at what you see here. It doesn't say if the borrower sells. It says if the borrower transfers beneficial interest in the property, the bank has the right to call the note due. Well, remember, what have we done? We've put the property into a trust. Who's the beneficiary of the trust? The seller. Has there been a transfer of beneficial interest? Heck no, because the trust owns the property and the seller's the beneficiary. So beneficial interest does not transfer until the mortgage is paid off, and then who cares? The due on sale clause does not apply. In all of these I've ever done over the years, I've had maybe 3 get a letter from the bank saying, hey, we noticed you've transferred your property, transfer the deed. We're calling this, loan due. If that happens, the seller, we instruct the seller to send that letter to the trustee. The trustee sends them a copy of the trust, says this, there's been no sale. The seller has put their property in a trust for asset protection, estate planning purposes. They are the beneficiary. Here's the proof. Problem goes away. Due on sale clause does not apply. So don't ever let anyone tell you that the due on sale clause will mess up a subject to. It will if you're not doing them right. But if you're doing them right, it won't mess them up. Then at the end, there's a few housekeeping items we always go over. What about homeowners insurance? Well, a couple ways you can handle that. One, you can leave the current one in place. You have to add the trust as a additional insured. There's no cost for that. It doesn't cost anything, but it has to be added. If you want to get your own insurance and perhaps get a landlord policy, which many people do, that's also fine. One, you can convert the current homeowner's insurance to a landlord policy, or you can go get a brand new one. If you do that, you must leave the seller on there because they're still the mortgagee. You must leave, sorry, the mortgagor. You must leave the mortgage company on there with the exact same mortgagee clause that they have, and then you add the trust as an additional insured. Pretty simple. What about the tax deduction? Well, the the mortgage company is going to send the year of end statement still to the seller. However, it's a matter of negotiation. When you're negotiating these, you can negotiate that with your seller. If you're having a hard time getting a seller to agree, you can say, hey, what about if I let you still take the tax deduction? But again, however you decide it, the IRS rule is that whoever has a beneficial interest in the property, which your buyer will have a beneficial interest by way of that assignment, and is actually making the payments, that is who's entitled to the tax deduction. No form is necessary. It's automatic, but it's however you want to negotiate it. And then how do I make payments? My suggestion is always, if the seller has an online account, they share the login and password with the buyer. The buyer goes online and makes those payments, and then the seller can always check and see that they're being made. Sometimes that doesn't work. If a seller has more than one account with that bank, they're not going to want to give away their login. Then there's additional ways to do it. This is the broad strokes overview of a subject to, and of course, there are more fine points to it, but this is what we have time to go over today. This gives you a very good idea of how it works and how it's done. And the exit strategies then, what do you do? Okay, now you've bought a property subject to, now what? Well, My favorite way is number 2 here. My favorite way to do these things, because on a subject to, quicker is always better. It's just, anytime a mortgage stays in someone else's name, if you can put a time limit on it, it's always better. I have clients who don't, but in that acknowledgement agreement, I like a clause that says that mortgage will be paid off within 5 years. I've seen 10, I've seen 2, but I also seen a whole lot that don't put in there at all. I think it gives your seller a better comfort level, but again, that's totally up to you. So my preferred way, quick, down, dirty, and easy, is how much do you want to make on this property? You got a subject to now. You just bought it subject to. Now you think your profit's going to be $10,000. So you get $10,000 from a buyer and just let them do that subject to closing with the seller. You're just out of it. You got your money and you're gone. However, that is not always possible because maybe the amount you want to make, someone doesn't have the money to come up with. So you can always stay in the deal. In that case, you find an end buyer, and then in that little agreement where we explain all the terms, we will write in your terms. You know, maybe you are going to make more money every month. Maybe the mortgage payment's $800, they're going to pay $1,000. Maybe you're going to get paid when they refinance. Again, these are all the creative deal points of the transaction that you are going to come up with. And this is where you have to put on your hat and be creative. And as with any negotiation, whether it's real estate or something else, the key to any successful negotiation, whether you're trying to convince a seller to go subject to, or whether you're buying a car, whatever you're doing, is find out the problem that the other party has. What do they want? What do they need? Solve that problem and you'll get the deal every time. I had a client one time who was buying a property in downtown Pittsburgh, a commercial building. There were 5 buyers, all full price or more. My client actually was not the highest offer. The property, the downtown commercial building was full of junk. The woman who owned it had a ton of, it was full of junk. My client, along with his offer, and this wasn't something he was asked, this was just him assessing the situation, looking at his surroundings and figuring out what to do. He included with his offer, I will give you 6 months to move all your stuff out of the building. You can keep it there for 6 months. Guess what? He got the contract and he was not the highest price. He solved her problem. She needed to sell the property, but moving that amount of junk was a daunting task. So it's your job in any negotiation to find out what pain the other party is having. What is their problem? What do they want? What do they need? You solve that and you'll get the deal. A third way to get out is you can lease option. And this is a very popular way. This is probably the most common one that I see. So now you have it under contract and you bought it subject to the mortgage. It's now owned by this trust. The trust, you will find an end buyer, and the trust is actually going to lease option it to your end buyer. So you will find a tenant buyer who will lease it. They have an option for whatever amount, $20,000 that they pay you. And at the end of however much time you give them, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they have the option to buy that property. I'm not going to go into lease options a lot in this context because we are going to talk about them next. So lease option is a creative funding strategy all its own. So we just mentioned them in the context of subject to, but they are also our second way of getting property with no money down. What is a lease option? Well, you lease the property from the owner, and along with that, you have an option to purchase for a specified time. You pay an option fee. It is non-refundable, but if you do exercise that option within the allotted time, it's applied to the purchase price. So you get a lease on a property, you're paying a lease of $1,000 a month. You have the option to buy that property for $200,000 in 3 years. In 3 years, if you exercise that option, you've paid a $20,000 option deposit fee. Your price you need to close is $180,000. If you do not exercise it in 3 years, you lose your $20,000. You just use a standard lease which has some additional language that says a violation of the lease nullifies the option to purchase. The reason we do that is because for a long time, and possibly still in North Carolina, when you went to court to evict a lease option tenant, if they saw that they had an option, the magistrates would refuse to do the eviction on the grounds that it was beyond their jurisdiction because your tenant had a property interest in that property. They would boot it out to district court, which takes a lot longer and is a lot more expensive. A few years ago, the North Carolina General Legislature passed a law that specifically says a magistrate shall not refuse to rule because there's an option associated with it. I haven't done a lot of evictions for lease option tenants lately. Last I knew, the magistrates were ignoring that. I would solve it by sending my clients to court with a copy of the statute, which was sometimes successful. But for whatever reason, it prevents that problem if you write it in the lease specifically. Man, if you breach this lease, your lease option's dead. It solves the problem. Lease options are subject to, and this is not subject to like we just talked about, bad wording here. Leases are subject to a North Carolina statute. I've given you the site here for the statute. I'm going to show you a little piece of it in a minute. There are specific language required for a lease option. You have to record either the option or a memorandum of the option. And there is a right of rescission, meaning for 3 days after they sign a lease option, your seller has the right, or buyer, either, has the right to change their mind. Now, let's talk for a minute about sandwich lease options. What is a sandwich lease option? A sandwich lease option is if you go to a seller and get a lease option, just like we've described here, and then you go find a buyer and you give them a lease option. So you lease option your lease option. Those are not recommended. And I would like to have a little contest to see if anyone can figure out why. And you can put it in the chat and we'll discuss it at the end. But if I forget, remind me, because I definitely need to tell you why not to do them. Okay, so here's, I gave you a clue, by the way. So here's the statute. This is a part of the statute, and this is where it says, not only do you have to have a statement about the right of rescission, it has to be in 14-point boldface type, that the purchaser has the right to cancel. So it is important to have these documents done by an attorney, so you make sure to keep up with all the statutory requirements. They do change from time to time. I do not require that my clients have closings in my office because a closing isn't needed really for a lease option. Some clients choose to do that. They're just more comfortable with it. But what I recommend is just have your documents drawn up by your attorney and then just handle it with your tenant buyer, but whatever you're comfortable with. What are your exit strategies for a lease option? Well, really, there's only one that's a really good option, and that's to find a buyer. And now again, I need to clarify what I'm talking about. If you get a lease option from a seller, your best bet to get out is to find a buyer and get out. You can sell your option, you can refinance it and keep it. So there are other options, but let's distinguish that from if you've done a subject to deal with your seller and now you have the property subject to, and then you do a lease option with your tenant buyer, then you don't need an exit strategy there. That is your exit strategy. So I know it's a little confusing. A lease option is both a creative finance tool and an exit strategy for your subject to. So that's why I just explain that, because it can be confusing. Our third way of creative financing is wholesaling. What is wholesaling? That is when you get a property under contract. And by the way, contracts are assignable unless they specify otherwise. So you have the right to assign that contract to someone else. The key to wholesaling is that to get your property under contract low enough that it allows room for everyone. So remember, your seller has to be satisfied with the purchase price. Your buyer has to be satisfied with what they're buying it for. And you have to make money in the middle. So there has to be enough leeway in there for all that to happen. It's very common that there is. It does require you to understand property values and how to price things and how to cost rehabs, which again, you should tune in on the 20th to learn more about. But that is key to a wholesaling deal. You have to know your market, get accurate repair estimates, and understand ARV. ARV is after repaired value. How do you protect yourself in a wholesale deal? Put a provision in your contract that you have the right to inspect that property for 120 days. If the property is unsuitable for any reason, you get your earnest money back and the contract's just canceled. That's how you protect yourself in wholesaling. That way, if you don't find an end buyer, get out. Why is earnest money important? Well, a couple reasons. Let's see, I don't know where, well, I don't know where I talked about this in my slides. I think it's on the next slide. So the Real Estate Commission has taken issue with these type of transactions in the past. And here's why. The Real Estate Commission's position is if you get a property under contract and assign it to an end buyer and make $10,000, that is a real estate commission. You are dealing in real estate without being licensed. Well, I'm here to tell you that I think that's a bunch of bunk. And I used to tell people, I think it's bunk, but you know, I don't want to risk, I'm not going to get in trouble if it happens as the attorney. You're the one who's going to have to deal with it. So I used to sort of back up my statement and say, I think it's bunk, but you know, I don't want to spend your money to find out because you're the one who's going to be paying the legal fees. Well, indeed, I ended up having a client who got sued by the Real Estate Commission, and they thought it was a real good case because this particular buyer had not even put down earnest money. In general, what the Real Estate Commission said was, if you put down enough earnest money, and they won't define what is enough, but I had a client who called and asked, and they told him it was enough to have skin in the game, that it's okay. Well, they sued this client and said that, you know, it was practicing real estate without a license. My argument when I answered the lawsuit was that, what is the skin in the game? The skin in the game is you have the obligation to buy it. So if you don't find an end buyer, you have to buy the property. Now, of course, we didn't discuss the fact that you could get out of it, you know, after 120 days, but the argument is your obligation to buy the property is consideration, and that's enough. You know, that's enough. And the Real Estate Commission dropped that case. So I have to say that it's a good argument. So what are your exit strategies for a wholesaling assignment of contract is the first one. This is best if both your buyer and seller are aware of your fee. How does it work? Whenever you go, your buyer closes with the closing attorney. So you've now got a property under contract for $100,000. You found an end buyer for $110,000. So your profit there is $10,000. Well, your buyer buys it directly from your seller for $110,000, and on the closing statement, you get paid your fee of $10,000. Boom, that's the down and dirty, easiest, simplest, fastest way, get in, get out. But sometimes, hey, maybe you found a killer deal and maybe you're gonna make 50,000, those once in a lifetime ones. And maybe you just don't really want everyone knowing all your business. So you don't want people to know your fee. It's still possible to close that way, absolutely. It's gonna be a little lengthier and it's gonna cost you a little more money. Why? Because you have to have 2 closings. You have to do a double close. So you buy from your purchaser and then you sell to your buyer on the same day. Well, you say, whoa, Kathy, you're telling me how to do this with no money down, but you just said I have to buy it. Righto, there's still ways to do that with no money. How do you do it? Well, the best, again, there's 2 ways. The best way is we create a loan from your end buyer to you. So in this case, your end buyer does have to know that you're wholesaling it. They don't have to know your fee. You just have to say, hey, I'm buying this property from a seller and I'm selling it to you, and I'm gonna quote unquote borrow the money from you to buy it. As long as they're okay with that, we create a promissory note and deed of trust. That so in this case, the purchase price is $100,000. Your end buyer is buying it from you for $120,000. You need $100,000. So we create a promissory note and deed of trust from you to your end buyer for $100,000. We have your closing. That $100,000 is for your seller. Then as soon as that seller walks out the door, you have your second closing with your buyer. At that closing, we show your purchase price of 110. We pay off your $100,000 note, and there's $10,000 left over for you and your closing. And then that money's in your attorney's trust account, and the attorney disperses that to your original buyer, and everything's on the up and up. Used to be, we could do those without any of that brouhaha. We could just do it in what we called a reverse double close. We would close with your buyer first, put the money in our trust account, then your seller would come in, he would close, we would already have the money, we would disperse it. But there was a bar ruling that attorneys can no longer do that because it's not disclosing everything. So this way, as long as your buyer knows you're quote unquote getting a loan from them, that's all that matters, and it's all safe and perfectly legal. Okay, but if none of that works, then you can get a bridge loan from a hard money lender. Let's say your buyer says, man, I don't want to be involved in all that. I don't understand it. I don't want to loan you money. But you just go get a bridge loan from a hard money lender. It's going to cost you a little bit. You close, you buy, and then you have your second closing to your end buyer. So those are your exit strategies for wholesaling. Our last method of creative ways to buy real estate with bad credit and no money is the BRRRR method. In case you don't know what this means, it means buy, rehab, refinance. Sorry, what did I miss? Buy, rehab, refinance, repeat. I think I'm missing something in there.
Buy,
okay, I'm sorry.
rent, refinance, repeat.
Yes, you buy the property, you rehab the property, you rent, like it's the most important part of that equation. If you didn't rent it, you wouldn't be able to refinance it. So you buy it, you rehab it, you rent it, you refinance it, you repeat. Sorry, right. Brain fart. In this case, well, how do I do that with no money? You get a loan from a hard money lender. That hard money lender will lend you money not only to buy the property, but to rehab it. You're going to pay for it. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be expensive. But when you're figuring out the money in that deal, you include that as a cost of doing business. You just include a 12% loan and points, and you need to make sure those numbers all still work out. So you have a high interest rate, and then you have sweat equity, or maybe not. Someone fixes it up. If you do, it costs you less, or you pay someone, you have your rehab funds. So once the property's fixed up, then you rent it out. Look, I wrote it right down there, and I still couldn't remember to say it. Rent it out. Find a tenant. Well, now what do you have? Now you have a property that's in great shape because you've rehabbed it really nicely, and it's producing income. So now you can go to the bank and refinance that property, and the bank will make you that loan. You won't need money down because you will have equity in the property because you fixed it up. So BRRRR is a really nice way of getting in a property with no money down, as long as you make sure your numbers work. There's no exit strategy on a BRRRR because it's included. The exit strategy is the refinance. And then finally, we have owner finance. Let me tell you this, the term owner finance is used incorrectly quite a lot. It's thrown around, people use it for subject to, it's not correct. Owner finance is only possible in a narrow set of circumstances, and that is you have an owner, a seller, whose property is free and clear. They don't have a mortgage. If there's a mortgage in place, you cannot owner finance. People might call it that, but it's not true. So we go back to our little graphic like the one we started with, only in this case, boom, boom, there's no bank. It works the exact same way, only this time your seller is the bank. The seller holds the note and the mortgage and makes interest on it. So if you are a person with a property free and clear, you can sell it and owner finance it. If you are buying property and someone has it free and clear and you can talk them into it, they will owner finance it. You will make your payments to them instead of the bank. They're secured by a mortgage, and if you don't make your payments, they can foreclose. It's exactly like the one we started out with, except instead of a bank, we just have a seller. And again, the exit strategy on that is whatever you want, because you can sell it, you can rent it out and keep it, you can do whatever you want. On your owner finance, the terms can be whatever you can talk them into. Someone might want to hold a 30-year loan, they might want a 5-year loan, and then you just have to be able to refinance in those in the time period when it's up. So these are your tools, your creative financing tools. You know, a hammer is a great tool, but you got to have a nail to make it work. If you don't have a nail, you have to look for another tool. The things that we've gone over here tonight, you can't ask the question, well, which tool is the best one to use? Because there's no answer. The answer to that question is the best tool to use is whichever one fits your deal, whichever one fits your situation. So you have to get out there and find sellers and figure out what their problem, what can you solve for them. When you know that, you'll be able to figure out which tool to use. You will, and if you need help with that, you go to your team, because I know you've heard it, and if you're a new investor, putting together your team is the most important thing you can do. Your accountant, your realtor, your attorney, because that team is who's going to help you. So if you go out there and find a seller and say, here's the situation, this is how much they owe, this is how much they want, I don't know how to make this work. Your team, if our clients bring that to us, we've seen every scenario. We'll figure out a way to make it work. We will help you. That's what your team does. And once you get more familiar and have done more of these, you will be able to figure them out on your own. You'll know all these tools and you'll be able to figure them out, but don't be afraid to ask for help up front from your team. So these are sort of some outliers, other creative things you can do. Equity partnerships, what is that? That's when you meet someone at TREIA and maybe you both have $5,000 and you team up and throw in 10 and go get a property that way. Or maybe you don't have any money and you meet someone who does. Believe me, there are a lot of TREIA members out there who would be happy to split a deal 50-50 with you, where they put up the money and you did all the work. I mean, these are just examples I'm throwing out. It's whatever you can come up with. Again, be creative. Self-directed IRAs, sometimes we have meetings on that, but the down and simple of that is, if you or anyone you know has money in a self-directed IRA, you can borrow from that and buy real estate. And there, you know, there's it gets paid back to your IRA. Any profits go to your IRA, so you're not pocketing them, but it's your future, so it's still your profit. Home equity loan. If you own a home and have equity in it, you can get a home equity loan, and you can use that to start buying property. Trade something other than cash. Man, this is a new one to me, but we had Bill Cook a couple months ago, and I don't know how many of y'all saw it, but this dude did something like he found a boat for sale for $2,500 and he bought that boat. Or no, back me up. First of all, he had a house he wanted to buy and the seller was upside down or something didn't work. And that seller really wanted the money to go buy a boat. He wanted $10,000 to go buy a boat, but that was just not $10,000 in equity in that property. So Bill Cook went out and found a boat for like $3,000, traded it to the guy in exchange for his $10,000 equity. You know, you can do any crazy thing you think of as long as it's legal. Or you can do a kind of deal where you maybe split the equity with the owner down the road. You maybe take over the mortgage or fix it up and sell it, or maybe it's free and clear, but it's in really bad shape. You get the property and make a deal with them where they get paid half when it's all fixed up. There's all kinds of ways, guys. It's just whatever you can think about, however creative your brain can be. Think of it, run it by your attorney. They will help you. That is the benefit of having a really good attorney. I'm back to something I was talking about with the subject to deal. You know, even in TREIA, you will come across wrong information. We have a little disclaimer at the beginning of every meeting where we're not, you know, responsible for what you learn here, and you have to do your own due diligence. But you know, we protect you to the best we can. We're not responsible for it. For example, yesterday I spent the entire day in a meeting with 2 FBI agents who drove down here from Washington, D.C. about a situation that I've been warning TREIA about for several years now, which is a person by the name of Craig Brooksby, who used to come to our meetings, and I think maybe was even a member at one time. The board became aware of shady dealings and kicked him out. So this is the thing you get from TREIA. that you don't get other places. This guy runs a company called The Estates, and he purports to be an expert and a guru, and he's very charismatic, and you will believe he is your expert. You go to meetings with him. He seems very legitimate. He seems like he knows what he's doing. You pay $70 a month to belong. You split your deals with him. He's your coach, your mentor, your guru, and your partner. And it was because of those bad business practices that we kicked him out. Lo and behold, years later, it comes out that not only has nearly everyone who ignored our warnings and joined his group anyway lost money. One of my clients is out over $250,000 to him right now. But here's the really bad news, guys. In case you know of anyone who's in the estates, you might want to have them give me a call. And this is a concept that's a little hard to grasp, because if you're a victim and you learn you're actually going to be a defendant, that's jolting news. But that's what's happening with the estates right now, because when you join Craig Brooksby's group, the estates, you have to agree that what they do, their database has foreclosure listings. And of course you can get that in the public record, but they have them in a really nice, organized format. So anyone who's a member of the estates of his group, you go through the list in the database, you find a property you want to buy, and you take it to the group, and the group sort of brainstorms the best way to do it. Hey, sounds legit, right? Like good, helpful, got this supposed guru who's going to walk you through it. Well, little do you know that what you just did was commit a federal crime, because what you just did was you agreed that only one person in your group could bid on that property at a foreclosure sale. And once one person chose it, nobody else will. And the logical argument to that, and believe me, I've tried to make it years ago when I had a client in this situation, is whoa, 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 look, 1 million other people in the world could go bid on that foreclosure property. We have a group of 20 people who agreed not to. You're telling me that we stifled the price? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. That is price fixing. If even you collude with one other person, if me and Leslie said, hey, this property's coming up for auction, let's go split it instead of bidding against each other, we just committed a crime. So it is that simple. Every person, and there were TREIA members who were members, every person who was a member of the estates, even if they lost money, even if they got totally screwed by this guy, which most of the people did, they are now going to be named in 2 lawsuits, a federal civil lawsuit, and what my FBI meeting was about is a federal criminal lawsuit. That's bad juju, folks. The reason I was meeting with the FBI agents is because there is this little provision. If you are the first person to come forward and tell about this crime, then you can get exempt from prosecution. Well, another attorney brought a civil action against these people. When I found out about it, then that means the criminal lawsuit is going to follow. So I, quick as I could, got my client in line to be that first person. So he's not going to get prosecuted, but other people will, and it's unfortunate. So we do our best to protect you, but having the right team is so important. I once gave a presentation at Money and More, which was a now defunct TREIA subgroup, which started out as TREIA West and is now TREIA West again. It was a panel, and we were all talking about kind of what we're talking about tonight, how to do creative deals and subject to deals. And a person who was on the panel with me gave completely horribly wrong advice, and told people that it was perfectly fine to do a subject to deal and to put your name on the deed. Now, I got up there and, I did not make a lot of friends that night. I'll just tell you that the leader of that subgroup at the time, has had a grudge against me and been after me for things ever since, because the other person was his friend or protege or something. But the thing about it is, I'm never going to let you get bad advice or wrong advice. So the other woman who had given this bad advice actually challenged me and said, well, where does it say it's illegal to put the deed in someone else's name? Well, it's not illegal. It's not a crime. You're not going to go to jail for it, but you could get sued for it civilly, because again, and she said, well, my attorney said it was fine and did it. Well, sure. You know what? If I'm an attorney who isn't specialized in this and haven't done this for years, and someone comes to me and says, I want to do this, I'll say, okay. I mean, it's not It's nothing wrong with it. It's not illegal. You got a seller who's going to let you put your name on their deed while they keep the mortgage. Okay, sounds stupid, but I'm going to do it. No problem. And that's what an attorney who isn't experienced in investors and hadn't seen hundreds of these deals could easily do. But they don't know, they don't know all that history with the Attorney General's office that I told you at the beginning. They don't understand what's going to happen if that seller, if something happens to the buyer and the seller can't get the property back. So when you're doing these deals, always be fair, guys, and think about it that way. It just makes common sense that you aren't going to put somebody else's deed in your name while they have the mortgage. It's common sense that you want to protect that seller. And if you don't, it's not illegal not to. There's no one to make you protect that seller. But if you don't, you're asking for trouble down the future, down the line in the future. And furthermore, why would you want to do a deal where you left the seller unprotected and you're just leaving yourself wide open for liability? So make sure who you're getting your advice from knows the advice they're giving, and make sure you're getting good advice. Ask an attorney that you trust and interview your attorney. Ask them, have you done subject to? Do you understand? Interview them. Interview 5, interview 10 until you find the right one. Because if you're doing these deals, it's your future. I mean, it's not something that you want to mess with. So I'm going to stop my screen share here and see if there's any questions. I hope you've had some good information here. Let me see what I got. Add my name for future group deals. Yay, thank you, Terry Williams. Crystal Slater says, my first deal was a subject to deal that I found through another TREIA member. I was able to renovate the house and sell it without problems. Yay. Sandy Murray, how does an investor make money putting property in a trust? Okay, Sandy, can you message me again if I answered that question for you? Because I think I should have when I gave you the exit strategies. But the short, she says, yes, I did. Okay, thank you. I know sometimes y'all ask these questions before I get to them, so good. Stacy Hagan, can we hire Kathy to do a subject to rather than become an expert ourselves? How much for the trust and legal? Yeah, you know what? I'm not giving you this information to make you an expert. Good question, Stacy. I'm giving you this information. You should never try to do these yourselves, ever. You can come to me. I'm not here to sell myself. You can go to your attorney as long as they, know what they're doing. But don't do it without an attorney. I'm not trying to make you an expert. What my hope is in giving you this information, that when you go out there to buy your properties and you come across, a situation where you don't know how to buy it, it's not going to be worth it to get a mortgage, or they're upside down or whatever. You will think back and say, I have these 5 tools I know about. Maybe one of these would fit. What I do want you to become is familiar with them so that you can make that determination when you're up against it. Now, again, when you're first doing it, your first deal, you might be, oh my God, those heads exploding. That's fine. Get your team in place. Come back to us and say, oh my God, I found this property. They owe 100,000. They want 120. How do I do this? We'll help you. And you know what, guys, after your second or third deal, you will absolutely, you'll get it. It'll click. You'll be able to figure it out on your own. Diane Schuster wrote rent. I don't know what that means. Diane, if you want to expound on that, send another message. Veronica Gwynn asks, can you wholesale subject twos? Yeah, sure. I think, I guess if the question is, can you sell them to another investor? I don't know. I guess theoretically it could be possible. I think usually your best bet, instead of wholesaling, is just because it's kind of the same as wholesaling, just find an end buyer who can pay you what you want to make and then just pass it on to them. That's kind of like wholesaling it. So I would say yes to that. For split equity, how do you protect the investor's money? Great question, David Heiberger. Depending on how you do the deal, there's a variety of ways. Number one, you could set up an LLC and both be equal members. Number two, if he's the guy or gal with the money, they could buy the property and give you some interest on the deed, or give you a deed of trust on the deed, or vice versa. You could have the property in your name and give a deed of trust. So there's definitely a variety of ways to protect, depending on your deal. But you got to partner up, and then again, your team will help you figure that out. I think the two most common ways is deed, mortgage, or forming an entity, LLC or S Corp or something. Mike Ollison, awesome info. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for being here. Diane Schuster. Oh, okay. Thanks, Diane. Diane was answering my brain fart, whether rent. Yeah, duh. I feel kind of silly for missing that. All right, so that's all the questions I have. I think I've run long, but I hope you guys got some good information. I'm happy to send slides to anyone who wants them. Yes, send an email to treiaprojects@gmail.com. And if also for any of those other things, making a video or sending suggestions, or if you want a copy of the slides, go ahead and hit us up. We'll get them to you. Anthony Rivera would like the slides done, my friend. What was that email again? I'm gonna type it in here for y'all.
While you're doing that, just a shout out to Kiana Eaglin, who sent the chat that she is a new member. So we wanted to welcome her.
Awesome. It's so great to see all these new members coming in, you guys. It's so awesome. I think, you know, being locked down is a real great opportunity for coming to these Zoom meetings and really getting involved. So I encourage you again to make those videos. Veronica Gwynn got you. I would like the slides. Veronica and Anthony, I will send you the slides. Things are, you know, this is great information for you to be able to go out and find these properties. So I hope it was helpful. Thank you guys all so much for being here, and hope you have a great, great evening. This is recorded. We maybe didn't catch it at the very beginning?
Yeah, sorry, we were halfway through the subject too.
So it will be available, a portion of it, on the TREIA website. And the way you do that is go, by the way, for any meeting that's recorded, go to the calendar. I'm seeing all your requests for slides. Don't think I'm not getting them because I didn't call you out. I see them all. Go to the calendar, click on the meeting that you want to see. It'll be crossed out, but it's still clickable. Scroll down and there's a link right there to the video for y'all. Most of our meetings are recorded, not all of them, but most of them are, and you're welcome to view them anytime.
We try.
It's one of the benefits of membership. Yeah, sometimes we forget. We do have some speakers who won't allow us to record them, but by and large, mostly they do.
We can put the slides up there too, Kathy.
Well, yeah, yes, we will put the slides up there. So thank you guys. Thanks again. Have a great night. Be here tomorrow to learn how to use that website. That's going to be great stuff.
Chuck's on, Kathy.
Kathy,
Chuck's on.
I just wanted to say one thing, that when you're doing subject twos, you really need to find an insurance company that knows how to insure that properly. That's a tricky thing to do.
Well, if you're going to change insurance, that is true. My recommendation is always that you leave the insurance in place and just add an additional insured. But yeah, if you're going to find a new insurance, it is very important to get it right. And I did talk about that a little earlier on, with making sure you have that mortgagee clause the same. You cannot take the seller off. If you screw that up, take the seller off or the mortgagee clause wrong, now you do have a problem with your mortgage company. So that is a very key component. Have a great night, guys. Thanks to all our new members.
Yeah, thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Great
See you soon.
presentation, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
You guys, can I still see this chat afterwards? Like, I got all these names. I guess I should write them down.
I think as long as you stay on the call, you should be able
Right.
to see
Yeah, I
everything.
guess that's right. Okay.